It's negative 40 degrees in northern China, the kind of cold where your spit freezes before it hits the ground. You're a peasant farmer with no electricity, no gas heat, and definitely no puffy jacket from REI. In weather like that, you'd last maybe 3 hours before you're a human popsicle. But somehow, millions of Chinese peasants not only survived winters like this, they actually had kids, built communities, and created stuff we still use today. Their secret? They were way, way smarter than us. I know we think we're tough, like that time your car broke down in January and you had to wait 20 minutes for AEA. These farmers dealt with weather that would make a penguin pack up and move to Florida. And they did it with tech so weird, modern survival experts are still trying to figure out how it worked so well. So let's talk about the Kang. Never heard of it? That's because we're too busy arguing about smart thermostats while these guys invented something that was basically your entire house in one piece of furniture. Imagine a huge brick platform, like a stage, running along one wall, maybe 6 feet wide, a couple feet high. The whole family sleeps on this thing. But here's where it gets crazy. Underneath, they built these maze-like channels that connected to the cooking stove. So when mom makes dinner, all that hot smoke doesn't just fly up the chimney like an idiot. Nope, it travels through these channels under the bed, heating up tons of brick and clay. By bedtime, you've got this massive heat battery that stays warm for like 12 hours. One meal cooks your food and heats your bed all night. Your fancy electric blanket can't do that. The engineering was insane. They'd test airflow by burning incense at the stove end and watching where smoke came out. Too fast and you lose heat. Too slow and you get carbon monoxide poisoning. These farmers figured out fluid dynamics without ever hearing the term. They'd adjust channel widths, add baffles, and create expansion chambers. Some Kangs had different temperature zones built in. Hot end for Grandpa with his creaky joints. Cooler end for the young folks who ran hot anyway. The whole family piled onto this thing. Grandparents, parents, kids, maybe some cousins if it got really cold. And yeah, it was exactly as awkward as it sounds. One big quilt covering everyone. And trust me, that quilt hadn't been washed since October. Why? Because washing meant freezing, and freezing meant dying. Family politics got real interesting real fast. The warmest spots were right over the main heat channels, and guess who got those? Not you, kid. Grandpa got the premium real estate while little Wang got shoved to the cold edge. Forget fighting over the TV remote. These people fought over who got to sleep where the heat actually was. The quilt situation was its own drama. These weren't your grandma's quilts with cute patterns. We're talking massive things stuffed with whatever they could find. Cotton if you were lucky, reed fluff if you weren't, old clothes torn up and restuffed if times were really hard. The edges were weighted down with stones or corn kernels sewn into the hem to seal gaps. One tiny air leak could mean somebody's toes went numb by morning. Scientists today tested these things and found out they're like 80% efficient at using heat. Your furnace at home? You're lucky if it hits 60%. These peasants were basically sleeping on the Tesla of heating systems, except it actually worked when it was cold. But some of these farmers looked at regular houses and said, you know what? Screw it. Why build a house when we can just live in the ground? They carved entire homes into hillsides or dug straight down, called them Yao Dong, which sounds like a bad joke but was actually genius. Imagine walking through the countryside and seeing doors and windows stuck into random hills. That's not decoration. Those are people's houses carved like 20 feet deep into the dirt. The soil up there is this superfine stuff called loess that's basically nature's insulation. When it's negative 15 outside, inside these caves it stays around 45 degrees. No heating needed. The earth does all the work. Building these things was an art. You couldn't just dig a hole and call it home. The arch had to be perfect, or it would collapse. Too wide, and the ceiling falls in. Too narrow, and you can't fit your Kang. They'd use wooden frames during construction. then remove them once the arch could support itself. Some families spent years perfecting their caves, adding rooms as kids grew up, carving shelves directly into walls, even adding primitive skylights by leaving thin sections of earth that let in filtered light. They'd carve out 3 or 4 rooms with curved ceilings so they wouldn't collapse. Slap some white lime paint on the walls to brighten things up and keep bugs away. Hang a thick mat over the door, and boom, you've got a house that's warmer than most apartments in Boston. The ventilation in these caves was next level. They'd carve air shafts at specific angles to create natural circulation. Hot air rises, pulls fresh air in from low vents, pushes stale air out through high ones. No fans needed. Some yaodongs had ceramic pipes built into walls that caught breezes and directed fresh air inside. These peasants were doing passive ventilation before LEED certification was a thing. Yeah, they were literally living like hobbits, but hobbits who understood physics better than your contractor. Studies today show these cave houses use 40% less energy than modern buildings. Your house, with its big windows and cathedral ceilings. These peasants would have laughed their butts off at your heating bill. Now, if you couldn't dig into a hill, you had to get creative above ground. And by creative, I mean building walls thicker than an NFL linebacker. 1/2 meter thick minimum. You'd lose half your house to walls, but when it's freezing or have a smaller living room, you make that choice real quick. The wall construction was fascinating. They'd use rammed earth, basically dirt mixed with a little straw, and pound it until it was hard as concrete, layer by layer, letting each one dry before adding the next. Some regions added pig blood to the mix. Sounds gross, but the proteins acted like glue, making walls stronger and more water resistant. Your modern sustainable builders charging premium prices for rammed earth homes? These peasants did it because it was cheap and worked. Everything about these houses fought the cold. Tiny windows covered with oiled paper instead of glass. Doors that only faced south to catch sun. Ceilings so low you'd bang your head if you were over 5'10". They'd stick all the pig pens and chicken coops on the north side as a wind barrier. The whole farm was basically designed like one giant winter coat. Speaking of coats, let's talk about clothes. You know those $1,000 Canada Goose parkas everyone's wearing? Ancient Chinese peasants had something better, and it cost about 3 chickens. Called it a mianao, which was basically a ankle-length padded bathrobe stuffed with cotton. Except you never, ever washed it. I'm serious. From October to March, that coat collected every bit of sweat, smoke, grease, and other stuff we won't mention. By spring, the thing could literally stand up on its own. But all that nastiness? It actually made it more windproof. North Face spends millions developing waterproof fabric. These guys just didn't shower for 4 months. Problem solved. The layering system was more complex than you'd think. First came the base layer, usually worn-thin hemp that had been washed so many times it was actually soft. Then a middle layer of newer, scratchier hemp, or ramie. Then the padded layer, then the outer shell. Each layer trapped air, creating insulation. They understood the principle of layering centuries before outdoor gear companies made it a marketing strategy. Before cotton showed up in the 1300s, poor people wore hemp, and not the soft hemp your yoga teacher talks about. This was rough stuff that felt like wearing a burlap sack. When cotton finally arrived, it changed everything. Women spent all winter spinning and stuffing these giant robes with pounds of raw cotton. A good mianao was like wearing your comforter to work. If you couldn't afford cotton, there was always sheepskin. One vest with the wool facing in could buy you extra hours working outside. Archaeologists found 2,500-year-old bodies wearing the exact same style boots peasants wore into the 1900s. If it ain't broke, why fix it? But clothes were just a mobile shelter. The real game was calories. These people ate like Olympic swimmers in training. We're talking 7,000 calories a day in deep winter. That's like eating 14 Big Macs, except instead of mystery meat, it was millet porridge thick enough to mortar bricks. Millet was the MVP grain up north. They'd cook it into this super thick porridge, maybe throw in some dried jujubes if they were feeling fancy. The complex carbs burned slowly all night, keeping your internal furnace running while you slept on your brick bed with 11 relatives. But here's what's crazy about their diet. They figured out food combinations that maximized heat generation. Ginger in everything during winter because it increased circulation. Mutton and dog meat, both considered heating foods in traditional medicine, showed up in winter stews. They'd eat fatty pork specifically for the calories, saving lean meat for summer. Every meal was calculated for maximum internal heat production. When vegetables ran out in November, out came the fermentation game. Every family had clay pots buried in the yard, turning cabbage into swan kai. This wasn't your hipster sauerkraut from Whole Foods. This was a survival kraut that had to last 5 months. The fermentation created good bacteria that helped digest all that grain when your diet was basically beige mush from December to March. The preservation techniques went beyond vegetables. They'd hang strips of pork in the coldest part of the house, letting them freeze dry into something like meat jerky. Fish got the same treatment. By February, you'd have these rock-hard protein chunks that needed serious soaking before eating. But they lasted, and that's what mattered. Some families had meat from the autumn pig lasting into April. They even figured out how to make booze work for them. Low-proof millet wine wasn't just for parties. A couple shots before bed dilated your blood vessels, making you feel warmer. Plus, after a few drinks, sharing a bed platform with your in-laws seemed way less terrible. Winter wasn't just survival time, it was a money-making season. While we binge Netflix and complain about seasonal depression, these people ran entire businesses from their heated beds. Women spun thread and wove cloth. Men braided straw into shoes and mats. Kids helped make rope. Every single scrap turned into something they could sell. The economics were surprisingly sophisticated. Villages specialized in different crafts based on local materials and traditional skills. One village might make the best straw shoes. Another wove the warmest wool blankets. Winter markets popped up where people traded crafts for grain or fuel. It was like Etsy meets farmer's market meets survival economics. The straw game was especially smart. All that wheat and millet straw left over from harvest, instead of just burning it, they'd braid it into everything. Shoes, hats, doormats, even these crazy elaborate dragons for New Year. Some villages still make them the exact same way today. Your great-great-whatever grandmother was basically running a craft business from her bed while staying warm. The social engineering was next level. Winter festivals weren't just fun and games, they were survival tactics. During the Laba festival, Buddhist temples cooked giant pots of 8-grain porridge and fed anybody who showed up. Free food when you're running low on grain? That's not charity. That's keeping your workforce alive till spring. Every festival crammed people together, which meant more body heat. 40 people in one room equals 40 space heaters running at 98.6 degrees. They literally partied to stay warm. The Winter Solstice Festival was huge because it meant days were getting longer. Even if you were freezing and down to your last bag of grain, knowing spring was technically coming kept people from losing it. Village organizing for festivals was serious business. They'd rotate which family hosted based on who had the biggest kang and most fuel. Host families got first dibs on temple porridge and communal grain stores. It was social pressure meets practical heat sharing. Nobody wanted to be the family too stingy to host when their turn came. They even got religion involved. The kitchen god wasn't just decoration. Families thought he snitched to heaven about their behavior, which affected next year's harvest. Being stingy with fuel or food was cosmically stupid. This kept even the greediest jerks sharing resources when neighbors were freezing. The government got it too. From about 1000 AD on, they kept emergency grain stores in every big town. Not just for famines, but released every winter to help families make it to spring. By the Ming Dynasty, government officials got coal allowances indexed to market prices. Even 600 years ago, they understood heating was a public health issue. Local officials who managed these granaries well got promoted. Those who let peasants freeze got demoted or worse. The imperial exam system even included questions about winter relief management. Imagine if the SATs asked about heating assistance programs. Different world. Nothing went to waste. Absolutely nothing. Straw heated your dinner, warmed your bed through the kang, got woven into shoes, then ended up fertilizing next year's crops. One plant, 4 uses. Meanwhile, we throw away K-cups after 12 minutes. These peasants would think we're morons. The animals were part of the heating system too. A pig puts out about 500 BTUs per hour. That's a fuzzy space heater that also makes bacon. Poor families built animal pens, sharing walls with their living space. The animals stayed warm. Humans got free heat. Everybody won except your nose. And yeah, it smelled exactly like you think. Between choosing to have it smell like a barn or freeze to death, you learn to appreciate eau-de-pig pretty quick. Rich folks kept animals separate. Poor folks were basically living in a barn with furniture, but they were warm barns. Fuel was its own nightmare. Trees were gone from centuries of farming, so they burned everything else. Millet stalks, corn cobs, even bricks made from coal dust mixed with mud. They invented alternative fuels way before it was cool. The coal dust bricks were genius, taking literal mining garbage and turning it into slow-burning heat sources, perfect for overnight warming. Communities had complex fuel-sharing systems. Families pooled money for bulk coal purchases, then split it based on how many old people and kids you had. It was communism before communism was a thing, except it actually worked because freezing to death is great motivation. The daily schedule revolved around temperature. Up with the sun because candles cost money. Heavy work during the warmest hours, usually 10 to 2. Inside for crafts and cooking as it got cold. By dark, everyone's on the Kong burning minimal fuel while maximizing body heat. It was involuntary family time, whether you liked your family or not. This forced togetherness had weird effects. Summer meant everyone scattered to different fields. Winter meant months stuck in one room with the same people. Grandparents told the same stories over and over. Parents taught kids skills. Everyone learned way too much about each other. It was like a reality show, except if you got voted off, you died. Modern engineers studying these old buildings can't believe how advanced they were. The Kang created what's called a passive stack effect. Hot air rose, pulling cold air through floor vents, creating circulation without any moving parts. These peasants accidentally invented sustainable building practices that architects charge thousands for today. Different regions had different tricks. Manchuria, where it got even colder, invented double-layer paper windows with dead air between. Basically, double-pane windows, but with paper. Border regions used yak wool for extra warm clothes. Every area perfected solutions using what they had. Climate historians found these systems worked so well that during the Little Ice Age, when Europe was starving and freezing, northern Chinese populations stayed stable. Their integrated survival system handled temperature drops that destroyed other societies. Not bad for people we think of as primitive. The mental health aspects were huge. Months indoors with your extended family could drive anyone nuts. So they developed elaborate games, storytelling competitions, riddle contests. It wasn't just entertainment. It was preventing your uncle from murdering your dad over who snored too loud. Winter weddings were the best. Guests needed fewer clothes, everyone was already together, and newlyweds got priority Kang spots. Nothing says honeymoon like fighting grandma for the warm spot. Young couples actually liked winter because it was the only time they got privacy. Sort of. When 12 people share a bed, you learn to be really, really quiet. Look at us now. Beijing apartments use central heating that's less efficient than the old Kang. Rural areas that ditched cave houses for modern buildings pay insane heating bills. We traded sustainable systems that worked for millennia for energy-sucking boxes that need constant fossil fuels. Some architects finally wised up. New green buildings in China use modernized Kang principles. Passive house designers study Yaodong ventilation. It only took us a few centuries to realize these peasants weren't primitive, they were geniuses. Their tools seem impossibly simple. A copper hot water bottle called a tang posy, hand warmers the size of coffee cups. But a tang posy from the Ming Dynasty still works today. Your space heater breaks after 2 winters. Their stuff lasted centuries. The fermented foods weren't just about not starving. Fermented vegetables gave vitamin C when produce was impossible. Fermented tofu provided a protein variety. Even the alcohol pulled different nutrients from grain than cooking. These peasants had better nutrition than most college kids living on ramen. Community support wasn't optional. If someone's roof collapsed, the whole village showed up. Not because they were nice, but because one frozen neighbor meant the gods might get mad and freeze everyone. Mutual aid was insurance, not charity. Buddhist monasteries kept fires burning all night for travelers. Merchant groups maintained rest houses with heated kangs along trade routes. Even bandits supposedly wouldn't steal winter clothes because that was basically murder with extra steps. Winter flipped some power dynamics. Women's indoor textile work became more valuable than men's farming. A good weaver could out-earn her husband all winter, leading to jokes about henpecked husbands that sound pretty familiar today. Kids learned survival through games. Songs taught when to add fuel to the kang. Riddles explained which plants survived under snow. Stories encoded weather prediction. Education disguised as fun, which honestly works better than homework. Even superstitions were practical. Not sweeping during New Year meant floors stayed insulated with debris. Taboos against washing in the first lunar month saved water and fuel. Ancestor worship requiring heated offerings meant families kept fires going even when food was tight. So next time you whine about your heating bill or complain that 68 degrees is too cold, remember these absolute legends who survived -40 with nothing but shared brick beds, underground houses, and jackets that could walk themselves. They turned not dying into an art form and built communities that lasted thousands of years. Makes you think. We've got smart homes and space heaters and fleece everything, but we'd probably die in a week living like they did. They had sustainable systems we're just now rediscovering, minus the sharing a bed with grandma. Maybe they were onto something. Or maybe I just really don't want to smell like a pig all winter. Either way, they survived and thrived in conditions that would kill most of us before lunch. Respect.